The rumble of motorcycle engines shook the windows of Copper Ridge Roadhouse, a weathered tavern that sat like a fortress at the edge of the desert highway. Chrome gleamed under the harsh afternoon sun as rows of bikes lined the gravel lot. Their owners gathered inside for the annual Brotherhood Run, a tradition older than most of the riders themselves. The air smelled of leather, motor oil, and the mesquite smoke drifting from the outdoor grill. This wasn't a place for the timid. The patched leather vests, the scarred knuckles, the hard eyes that had seen too much, they all told the same story. These men had earned their respect the difficult way, through loyalty, sacrifice, and an unbreakable code that outsiders would never fully understand. At the center of it all sat Marcus Reaper Kane, a mountain of a man whose reputation stretched across 3 states. His vest bore patches that chronicled decades on the road, president of the Desert Snakes chapter, a brotherhood forged in fire and sealed with blood. His beard was gray now, streaked with white, and deep lines carved his weathered face like roads on a map. He had survived prison, betrayals, wars both literal and metaphorical. Nothing rattled him anymore, or so he believed. But that belief was about to shatter, destroyed by the desperate voice of a 7-year-old girl who would appear out of nowhere with terror in her eyes and words that would save his life. The roadhouse buzzed with rough laughter and clinking glasses. Bikers traded stories, slapped backs, and toasted fallen brothers. The jukebox played old rock anthems that everyone knew by heart. Reaper sat at the head table with his closest brothers, men who had ridden beside him through hell and back. The bartender, a grizzled veteran named Lou who had served this crowd for 20 years, brought over a fresh pitcher of beer and a bottle of whiskey, Reaper's usual. The amber liquid caught the light as Lou poured it into a glass, sliding it across the scarred wooden table with practiced ease. Reaper nodded his thanks, reaching for the glass, ready to make a toast to the brothers who couldn't be here, the ones who had fallen over the years. But before his fingers closed around the glass, a small shape burst through the open door, moving with frantic urgency. Conversations stuttered. Heads turned. Every set of eyes in the roadhouse locked onto the intruder, a tiny girl in a bright blue dress, her light brown hair cut in a practical bob that framed her small face, her bare feet leaving dusty prints on the floor. She was out of breath, chest heaving, eyes wide with panic. She looked completely out of place in this den of leather and steel, like a sparrow that had flown into a lion's cage. Her name was Sophie Martinez, though nobody there knew it yet. For the past 2 weeks, she had been living in a nightmare that no child should ever know. Her father had disappeared, swallowed by the desert after a truck breakdown on a lonely stretch of highway. Her mother, desperate and searching, had left Sophie with a neighbor who turned out to be worse than a stranger. The woman was cruel, barely feeding her, locking her in a shed at night. 3 days ago, Sophie had escaped, slipping out through a loose board and running into the vast emptiness of the desert landscape. She had survived on water from irrigation ditches and scraps she found behind gas stations. She was hungry, exhausted, and terrified. But she was also remarkably observant, a trait her father had always praised her for, telling her that noticing details would serve her well in life. If you believe in the power of observation, in trusting your instincts, and in the courage it takes to speak up when something feels wrong, then pause for a moment. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to Bike Diaries. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from today, because this story will remind you that heroes come in all sizes, and sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. Just minutes before she burst into the roadhouse, Sophie had been hiding behind the dumpster in the back alley, searching for food, anything to quiet the gnawing hunger in her stomach. That's when she saw him. A thin man with nervous movements and darting eyes, someone who clearly didn't belong in this place. He had crept toward the back entrance of the roadhouse, checked over his shoulder repeatedly, then slipped inside through the kitchen door. Sophie's instincts screamed danger. She had learned to read people during her time on the streets, to distinguish between those who might help and those who meant harm. This man moved like someone doing something terrible. Curiosity and concern pushed her closer. She crept to the kitchen window, filthy and cracked, and peered inside. What she saw made her heart pound so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The man pulled a small vial from his jacket, uncapped it with shaking hands, and emptied its contents into a whiskey bottle sitting on the counter. A bottle with a distinctive label that Sophie had seen the bartender carrying just moments before. The man's face twisted with hatred as he muttered something under his breath. Words Sophie couldn't quite hear, but understood in their venom. Then he slipped back out the way he came, vanishing into the maze of back alleys before anyone noticed. Sophie didn't know who that whiskey was for. She didn't know what was in that vial. But every instinct her father had taught her, to pay attention, to trust what she saw, to speak up when something was wrong, told her that someone was about to get hurt badly. She thought about staying hidden, about protecting herself the way she had learned to do. But her father's voice echoed in her mind, telling her that good people don't walk away when they can help. She gathered what little courage she had left and ran. She burst through the front door, past the shocked faces, past the wall of leather and muscle, straight toward the biggest man in the room because somehow she knew, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that he was the target. "Don't drink that!" Her voice cracked with desperation, high and clear in the sudden silence. She pointed at the glass in front of Reaper with a trembling finger. "Don't drink it, please!" The roadhouse erupted. Men stood, chairs scraped, voices rose in confusion and anger. Who was this kid? How did she get in here? Several bikers moved toward her, not threateningly, but firmly, ready to escort her out. This was no place for children, especially not frightened little girls interrupting their gathering. Reaper himself stared at her with a mixture of surprise and irritation, his thick eyebrows drawn together. He wasn't used to being interrupted, much less by someone who barely reached his belt buckle. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the raw fear in her eyes, fear that wasn't directed at him or his brothers but at that glass of whiskey. Maybe it was the way she wasn't begging or crying or looking for attention. She was warning him, genuinely, desperately trying to protect him from something. Her entire body shook, not from cold, but from the sheer effort of finding the courage to speak. She looked like she had been through hell, her blue dress torn at the hem and stained with dirt, her knees scraped and bleeding, her face smudged with grime. Yet here she stood, in a room full of dangerous-looking men, shouting at their president to save his life. Reaper held up a massive hand, silencing the room instantly. His brothers stopped moving, waiting. He had led them for 15 years, and they trusted his judgment absolutely. He leaned forward, his weathered face level with Sophie's, and spoke in a voice that was surprisingly gentle despite its gravelly depth. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why shouldn't I drink it?" Sophie's words tumbled out in a rush, tripping over each other. She told him about the man in the alley, about watching through the window, about the vial and the whiskey bottle. Her sentences were fragmented, jumbled by fear and exhaustion, but the core message was clear. Someone had poisoned that drink. She described the man as best she could, thin, nervous, wearing a dark jacket with grease stains, a tattoo on his neck that looked like a scorpion. She even remembered the way he moved, quick and jerky, like someone who knew he was doing something wrong. The description hit Reaper like a fist. He knew exactly who she was talking about. Danny Vickers, a prospect who had been rejected from the club 6 months ago after failing to prove his loyalty. The kid had taken it badly, making threats, vowing revenge. The club had written him off as all talk, just another wannabe who couldn't handle rejection. They had been wrong. Reaper looked at the glass in front of him, the amber liquid that suddenly seemed sinister. Then at the frightened child who had risked everything to warn him.